Hello everybody and welcome to Game and Gadget Podcast number 6, a unscripted podcast where we just talk to wonderful special guests, and it's a slight change from before. So me and Tony were doing a podcast before called the Bits and Bobs Podcast, which basically gave us this opportunity to ramble, and sometimes we'd have a guest along to join us for the ride. But we've just merged this with the Game and Gadget Podcast. It'll become a more regular thing, time permitting, and here we are, and streaming this live for the very first time. So I'm excited. We're using new cloud podcast recording software. We're expecting big things, so I think we're all intrigued to see what happens at the end of it. So with me today I have Tony Warriner, who's now going to tell us a little bit about his background rather than me ramble on and try and give in a sentence what he does and what he did and what he's about to do.
Am I? Well, I've been writing games and stuff since 85, back in the 8-bit days. Revolution, of course, from 1990 onwards, where I worked with Steve from whatever that was, 92 or something, Steve? 93. Did that on and off for many years, Broken Sword, Steel Sky, all that kind of stuff. And then the last decade or so, I've been doing different bits and bobs here and there for different people. Bit of mobile, bit of this, bit of that, bit of web. I'm currently working for Shifty Eye Games in Canada. Potentially not for all that much longer. I've been doing that for a couple of years though, so time for a change maybe. And finally, I think the plan is to do my own stuff. That's what I need to do. So I'm kind of gearing towards doing my own stuff.
You've been kind of a freelancer in some nature at one time or other, though, haven't you? So it's not completely alien to you. Yeah.
But I mean, the trick with being freelance is that it's easy to say freelance. Are you doing your own stuff, or are you doing stuff that people commission you to do? I mean, your own stuff is the dream, but it's kind of difficult still, or maybe it was difficult and now it seems a bit easier. I don't know. I think it's knowing what you want to do and what you need to do. And I don't know. I feel for once, the first time in a long time, I've got a clear idea of what I think I should be doing. So that's why I'm heading that way again.
That sounds like a special epiphany to have. If only we're all so lucky.
It may be famous last words.
and Steve, Mr. Steve Ince here, maybe you could just give us a little bit about your background too.
Well, I haven't had an epiphany.
You should, Steve.
I've been in the games industry in various ways for nearly 3 decades. I joined quite late in life. I mean, obviously Tony began his gaming career while he was still at school. But I was in my mid-30s when I joined the industry, and I'd had a kind of mixed bag previous to that. From working in bingo halls to working in metal refineries. So it was a bit strange, sort of, and then coming into game development with, sort of like with Revolution Software, and being given a fantastic opportunity, and being able to kind of like just develop, so many creative aspects whilst having the pleasure to work on so many, great games. And then obviously I left Revolution, turned freelance, and sort of concentrated on the writing and design side of things. From working on games like The Witcher to sort of small casual games, but also writing books. Written a couple of books about game writing, as well as a couple of novels and a picture book.
A picture book. That's brilliant. But how on earth do you go from bingo to working for Revolution Software? Where was the transition? Where was your epiphany to make that?
Well, actually, sort of like the bingo, I kind of fell into that accidentally, really. Sort of like it was one of those, oh God, I need to find something, I need to find a career. I left university without a real kind of direction, and then fell into bingo and spent 2 years, sort of like in the southeast, going from one club to another as, sort of like assistant manager, sort of like long hours and horrible. And in the end, I left because, I didn't like the exploitation of people's weaknesses for gambling, and it's just, I just felt as though, sort of like, it just wasn't for me in the end. And then I went to work for the for the metal refinery, and that was supposed to be a temporary job, and I ended up working there for 8 years, and it was just crazy. And then I sort of was made redundant from there, and it was kind of like, oh God, I've got to find something more creative, sort of. And I knew somebody who then knew that Revolution were looking for somebody, and just fortunate to get taken on, I think.
So, while you were doing the bingo, while you were in the metal refinery, where was the creative spot? Where were the juices there? Were you sort of experimenting in your own time? I'm just trying to understand where that happened.
Yeah, I did, sort of like bits and pieces of writing, nothing substantial. But I also, sort of like did a lot of painting and drawing and stuff. I've always done that aspect from being very young. And sort of like I did a couple of years as well. I did evening class. Sort of like it's supposed to be a 5-year course to lead towards a fine art degree, but I only did a couple of years, just because sort of like lack of time more than anything. Of course, sort of sort of prior to joining the games industry, I had sons. Sort of marriage, sons, divorce. It's sort of the way of life.
Absolutely. So, Tony, last time we spoke in the podcast, we were talking about things like ZX Spectrum Next. Have you had any more time to dabble with it since it arrived?
No, and it's actually transitioned from being on the desk to above the desk in its box again now.
Oh dear, this is like some sad Toy Story film.
Yeah. I'm a bit in two minds about the Next. Actually, I mean, the actual machine itself is obviously very nice indeed. Everything about it's nice, and what they delivered and what they said they were going to deliver. I mean, they exceeded it really. I mean, the thing itself is perfect. I guess I'm a bit down on it because I mean, they probably never said they were going to do this any different, but all they've done is 2 Kickstarters, and the entire production run on the machine is the two Kickstarters. Which I'm not sure how many machines that is. It's like maybe it's 20,000 machines or something like that. It's not huge numbers, and I'm kind of disappointed about that because. To my mind, if you bring the Spectrum back to life, you kind of want it to just keep going, and like a Raspberry Pi, it's a real thing. It's got a website, and you can see your mate's Spectrum Next, and you can go on a website and buy yourself one the next day, or you can go on Amazon and buy it, But this isn't like that. It's like there was the Kickstarters, and now it's like that's it, So it's not a real machine in the sense that it's a living thing anymore. I mean, it's kind of a curiosity almost. I don't know. I'm disappointed by that. I thought they would do a Kickstarter, judge whether they'd done the right thing, if it was popular, if it worked, and if people were going to support it, and maybe make a judgment to find a way to put the thing into perpetual production, and maybe in 5 years' time there'll be a Next 2 with the revisions and some enhancements or whatever. But it would be a living thing and evolve into a platform of some form, and that's not what it is. It's a limited run, and that's the end of it, which seems to me very disappointing.
So, what drew you?
Seems a bit short-sighted, isn't it? Sorry, I'm just saying it seems a bit short-sighted, sort of like there's going to be interest in something like that. And, sort of it just, you need to sort of like release it and then effectively kill it straight off. just seems odd.
Yeah, I mean, they've hit the target audience, of course, which was people like me who had the first one and were excited about seeing the thing alive again and the Spectrum name and all the things. I mean, as I say, it's a work of pure perfection, is what they've done. It's just a lack of vision beyond that, which is a shame. I mean, maybe they're smarter than me, and they know perfectly well that they've actually sold the machines to everybody who's going to buy one. And in reality, it can't compete against something like a Raspberry Pi, which is more extensible and obviously runs the internet perfectly well. And what would you really do? What would you really do with the Spectrum Next? Would you start building it out so it can have a browser on it, and then it just becomes a PC, doesn't it? So maybe they've said, maybe they're right. Maybe their vision is that you can't really take it anywhere. But nonetheless, I mean, back in the 80s, you buy one of these machines, and all you could do on it was program it in BASIC, and then when you got really good at that, you could try and learn assembly on it, and then by that point you were a pretty competent engineer, and that was the beauty of it. So maybe there is a market for a machine where you buy it for your kids, and all they can do on it is create things, rather than consume things, and maybe that's its selling point, It's the doing computer, it's the making things computer, rather than it all comes down the internet and it's just another browser, I mean, they're trying to do both on the Pi and with some success for whatever it costs, £10, So maybe they couldn't compete with that. They thought, I don't know.
So what drew you to the ZX Spectrum Next over? I mean, is it the Raspberry Pi is in a way too versatile, as in there isn't that niche, you can do so much with it, whereas the Spectrum Next, there's certain boundaries and limitations to it where probably that makes it a little bit more appealing for you?
Well, the thing about an 8-bit machine, of course, was that you really could sit down and learn everything there was to know about it. You could disassemble the ROM, you could learn how the ports worked on the back, and you could program it in assembler, and there was nothing more. You could learn everything there was to learn about a Spectrum, and that was part of the appeal. A Raspberry Pi, it's a cheap Linux machine, and you can spend your lifetime learning how Linux works. And it's pretty archaic, a lot of it, and very specialist. And at the end of it, you're qualified to work on server farms, stuff like that. It's not quite the same magic as an 8-bit machine had.
I can understand that. So from your perception, Steve, obviously technology's come on a long way and continues to go at a fair pace, even if there is a component shortage right now. As far as game writing is concerned, has the dynamic changed? Is there more involved? Is there more requirements, or are the fundamentals for game writing still the same?
I think that we have more opportunities to get a greater variety of story out there, I think. The trouble is, in the main, sort of like if you want to get big stories out there on big games, you have to work with the big developers. And that doesn't always give you the freedom that you want. Sort of you've got to work on their ideas. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Lots of people would love to work on, some of these huge titles. I think that we're seeing more interesting stuff come along in the indie areas. Sort of like people are doing personal projects, with some friends or stuff like this, or a small team, a small studio, and they're having the fun. They're doing stuff because they're loving it, and we're still getting that. We're still, after all these years, in spite of the advances in technology and publishing and all sorts of platforms, sort of like we're still getting a love of creating games that are, got their own little twist or style to them because people want to do something for themselves. And really, sort of, in a sense, that hasn't changed at all. It's just got better. People have found tools that enable them to do what they want in a much better way. Sort of like when when Tony and I started, or Tony obviously started before me, but when I joined Revolution, sort of everything was having to be made to proprietary tools for all sorts of things. The graphics, the logic, the dialogue, and everything. And so sort of that kind of thing gave sort of like each game its unique feel as well. Sort of like because there were all these things. But now sort of the tools are quite flexible, and so you don't need to not always do that. You can concentrate, sort of the programming in stylization, say, or the graphics, in a particular way, and so the story as well. And I think that, sort of like the fact that we've got this ability to kind of like shift focus a bit more towards the content, I think is the biggest change. And that's not to say that sort of like people can't do original stuff from scratch. So I mean, one of my favourite games. I mean, it's not really recent now, but kind of like Thomas Was Alone. Sort of Mike Bithell more or less did that game on his own, and it was just an original take on a platform game. And I think that, but yeah, it had a great story as well. And so sort of there is a lot more going on.
Interesting. So, maybe.
I mean, good stories. Sorry, good stories are good stories ultimately. I mean, this is why Broken Sword has lasted so long, and even Steel Sky. I mean, sort of like driving those games is a good story with good characters. Sort of. Yeah, I mean, there's other stuff going on as well, but at the core is a great story.
Absolutely. And that's an interesting comparison. So when I look at something like Broken Sword, which of course is probably one of Revolution Software's most well-known titles, although they've got certainly quite a few to fall back on, that was almost like a continuous story. Like every action had a reaction, and everything you picked up had a reaction, and if you combined it with something else, it had a reaction. It was almost like the story was a constant. Now, if I compare that to something like The Witcher, which is, I would say, a lot of the story out of AAA titles where they're spending tens of millions of dollars on these games comes out of a very carefully scripted cutscene. So it's an animation where you kind of sat back and watching the thing happen and unwind. And then you're back to the action, you follow the path, you get on your horse and do whatever. So they try and say, when you hop on the horse, you may have a conversation with somebody who's also on a horse to add some extra detail. But it's not continuous because, in essence, it's an open world you explore, and then that will trigger events. Where I always felt like a point-and-click adventure, although technically you're triggering events, it was almost a constant thing. You were hitting things all the time.
Yeah. The Witcher is a funny game, actually, because, I mean, I wasn't involved with the writing directly. I was involved with the script editing. So I saw this in a very sort of funny way. First game, I was given 100,000 words and told to reduce it by a third, which isn't really editing; it's more butchering. But sort of, so you kind of having to get your head around all these. As you say, a lot of it is kind of like broken up into these, slightly disconnected things. And so you're trying to be consistent within a very, very strange environment. But yeah, I mean, they're hugely popular. Although I found it difficult to play, they're too hard for me.
So, Tony, back in the day when you were working on these games, when the script came along, how did you sort of break that down into the game? What were the processes involved? Were there things given to Steve where, here's the outline, this is what we expect to happen, we need dialogue? Or was Steve like shaping it, we're going to this location? How did that process work, with particularly the programming side of things? I know this isn't a quick answer.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot recently. How did we make Broken Sword? It's a good question. I mean, it was not very well planned. I think it's fair to say. I mean, that was the defining factor of any Revolution game was a lack of planning. But something that facilitated something else, which was a kind of I can't say the word dynamism between the different people working on it, and once in a while it would absolutely gel together into a seamless process whereby creative assets were just flowing around the place in their own special way. And I guess those guys programming the engine and then implementing what we called implementing the game itself would be at the centre of it all to some degree. But everyone was very close to the engine and to everybody else, and people would talk to each other and decide what they were going to do. There was a rough plan, but Charles and the design people were only ever a few days ahead of the implementation. Sometimes they were behind it, and stuff would just be flowing into the game. And sometimes people would be, like Steve Oates on the sprites would be talking to me, or he'd be talking to Steve, or even a music guy, and they'd make decisions about what would be cool and interesting, and that was. Those decisions were never part of a planning process. They were never on some spreadsheet with costings against them. It was just like, oh, this would be good. Let's just do it, and it would come down the pipeline and end up in the game. That's just how we did it. It was a small enough team to be able to flow that way. It kind of started to break down when we did In Cold Blood, I suppose, which was a bit bigger and more expensive and had bigger flaws in the technology plan and stuff like that, which generated bigger problems. But back in certainly down up to that point, Broken Sword 1, 2, Steel Sky, and Lure, and that kind of thing. It was very much just here's a bunch of people, and somehow it all fits together, and the game gets made. I'm of the opinion that, and I'm repeating myself from what I said on your thing the other week, Steve, but that to me that's how games should be made, and that the team should always be small enough that they can sit around a couple of pizzas and decide what they're going to do for the next couple of weeks, and that's good enough. That's where that's the grassroots. That's where good stuff comes from. That's where innovation comes from, and that's certainly where I would want to be working.
I think that's right as well. So you get a handful of people in a room throwing ideas about, and it can be incredibly creative. But you put too many in that room, and you get bogged down. You're managing people's ideas more than you are actually, deciding which ones are going to go through. It's a funny process. If you go back to when I joined, I joined partway into Steel Sky, and that was fascinating because I thought that was just such a great looking game, and I was doing bits and pieces on the artwork and some sprite animals and stuff like this. And then when we moved on to Broken Sword, the original intention was to do it at the same resolution. But then CDs came along, and suddenly, better monitors were available. So we were having to kind of change our thoughts. So we were changing our approach to the art style and everything. And it became a bit of a mess for a while until we really kind of found that direction again. And that's, but we started bringing more people in, and it was difficult to manage. And so I got made producer. So it was my job to try and pull everything back online. And oh God, that was a nightmare. I've never done anything like that before.
It was a mess. But, Broken Sword really was an epic mess, wasn't it? But look what came out of it. You can say none of that. On the day you finish Broken Sword, none of it matters, does it? Because you've got Broken Sword.
No.
And here we are, nearly 30 years later, and that game has been played right now on mobile devices.
Yeah. But also, you learn so much in the process of doing something like that. So when we did Broken Sword 2, we managed to release that a year after Sword 1, which was, still a phenomenal achievement, even though we kind of knew what we were doing, and it was in the same sort of style, gameplay-wise and stuff. But still an awful lot of content in there, wasn't there? So.
It was, yeah.
And then a director's cut came along and added more.
I must admit, I'm not a fan of the director's cut because I think it puts too much emphasis on Nico at the beginning, and it's really George's story. But that's just a personal thing. It's not that it's bad. I just don't think it's quite the same as the original.
So is the risk, isn't it, of a director's cut? Particularly if you've played the original and then you think, oh yeah, the director's cut, what we're going to get, and then put extra bits in it. And I think it really is up to the individual whether they're going to enjoy it or not. And it's such a hard one. It's almost rose-tinted glasses situation, and how much you remember the first one. If you played the first one a lot, and then suddenly there's something jammed into it at the start, it's probably going to be jarring. But maybe if your first time coming to the game, I don't know. It's an interesting one, for sure. I think the intriguing one was when I played that on the Nintendo Wii. And there I was with the motion controller. And I thought, hey, this isn't too bad for point-and-click adventures. It was almost like it was designed for it. But then when you try Broken Sword, actually, this is where technology has actually lent itself to 2D point-and-click adventures. Tablets. To be able to touch an object and interact. I think that... When I think using a mouse for 2D point-and-click adventures, and I thought that was the bee's knees at the time, using a tablet, oh my word, that is the way to go. If I'm ever going to play a point-and-click adventure now, I really want to do it on a tablet. And when I play Broken Sword, and I've got so many different flipping versions of it now, it's the iPad version I will play.
Yeah, it did work well with touch. I mean, you see some adventures that don't have a good UI, and then it's no better than it used to be, or worse, because if they're just trying to do the old mouse interface with touch, you need to push it a little bit further and do something custom just for touch. But I think we did quite well with first of all what we did on Steel Sky, which was the first one we did. So I mean that UI did work pretty well. And everyone copied us afterwards, so that was good.
Yeah, because they released a version of Monkey Island, didn't they? Where effectively you were dragging a mouse around the screen.
Yeah, mouse dragging is not.
Way to use a touch screen.
Mouse dragging is no good. You have to take it all away and start again.
Wow, sounds a lot of work.
Well, it's not that much work. I mean, you just need. It's a design job, really. And if you got the engine, then the content was unchanged. It's just a new UI. So it's new. You should be able to slice that off and put a new UI in, and what it joins onto is exactly the same as it used to be. That's in all the things you've got to do to make a game. That's not the hardest one, certainly.
So, Steve, you're writing all this content. You're now managing all these people. You're then passing it on to folks like Tony to do their wizardry and get it up on screen in some digital fashion. What were the early builds like when you had a little look at it early on?
It's difficult, really, to say.
I mean, were there a lot of the sprites in? Were a lot of the animations in? Or was it really bare bones what you were getting back and you were having to figure it all out?
Yeah, I mean, we went for a long while, sort of like, there's an awful lot of like tool development and engine development and stuff, sort of, which kind of gives you a leeway to get a bit of, sort of steam on going on the backgrounds and the sprites. I mean, one of the biggest jobs was Steve Oates with the George character set, because we decided to scale the character to fit the perspective of each location. So we needed kind of like a formula that allowed us to do that. But also, Steve had to create this character set that, the 8-direction animation, and sort of like he had to make it turn off either the left foot or the right foot, depending which part of the kind of walk cycle he was on. And then I think was it James who did the programming for the scaling, had to kind of like find the right route for George, sort of while it was scaling and changing the footstep size and all this kind of stuff. It was very clever, but very sort of fiddly stuff. And then of course Steve would look at it on screen and then sort of make tweaks and change. It became very complex, and then there was a lot of other peripheral animation that he put in. Like when he was standing, he'd kind of like flick his hair back and all this kind of stuff. Then there was the talk anims and how sort of like we'd fake lip syncing by, sort of like the anim would only move, or his mouth would only move when the level of the voice was above a certain volume and all things like this. It was there was a lot going on. And that's before you even start properly implementing, sort of the specific sprites in a location and all the logic that goes with picking objects up and combining them and, talking to other characters about them and all this kind of stuff. It's sort of, we knew where we wanted to be, but it took us a while to get there.
That scaling was, I think that the algorithm was yours, wasn't it? The maths. I think you did it.
Yeah, I came up with the original formula, and then Dave used that to create a tool so we could actually set the scaling within each location. So we kind of set one line to 0 where the horizon was, and another one, sort of somewhere near the bottom where it would be maximum size for George, and then it would scale between them.
Scale A and scale B.
And then I think it was James who used that to kind of like, sort of actually do the in-game scale. But, yeah, I think it's the only time that I've used my A-level maths.
It's all worth it.
You go through all this stuff, and then, sort of, you have one instance in your life where you actually...
That's pretty amazing then, isn't it? Bingo, metal refinery, formula for scaling George. Marvellous.
Yeah. It's my significant contribution to Broken Sword, I think.
On your gravestone, Steve. Here lies Steve Ince. Did the scaling for Broken Sword.
It would have been my podcast introduction if I had known that earlier.
There'd be 2 lines on the gravestone. We'll know what it means. A equals B plus X. Yeah, that was it.
I can't remember it.
I never understood it.
I don't think I've got a record of it. I'm going to have to kind of like create it from scratch again.
I'll dig it out for you, Steve.
So if it was quite, not an unplanned process, but certainly it was very agile. You're having to come up with new ideas all the time. You're having to react very quickly. What was the deadline pressures like with all that going on? Oh, that seems like the right question to ask.
It's kind of... It's one of those, ooh, there it is.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, Broken Sword 1 was famous for overrunning quite considerably. I mean, it probably ran a year over what it was meant to be, I would think. And then they kind of punished us by saying, right, we're taking all of it away from you on the follow-up, where we're going to claw back. The publisher was basically going to claw back all of the overrun and all of the overspend on a quick sequel, which is basically what happened. So the 2.5 years of Broken Sword 1 was turned into 1 year to the day on the sequel. I mean, you can see that it's a smaller game, albeit it's probably about the right size anyway. But the complexity of Broken Sword 1 is certainly not there in Broken Sword 2 because it was a good 18 months less time, and over half the budget.
Yeah, it's a lot more straightforward story as well. Kind of very
linear. Yeah.
You're not, you haven't got the options to kind of wander around Paris, or kind of like go to Spain before you go to Syria, or vice versa. There are a number of really good bits in Broken Sword 1 where, sort of you feel as though you're in control, and so too you feel as though you're taken along by the story a bit, I think. Although some people prefer number 2 to number 1.
Yeah, it's an okay game.
Yeah, it's a good game.
So for something like a point-and-click adventure, and you've done a few, as far as when you're getting bug reports and testing involved, how on earth, I mean, the number of variables, have they got this item in their inventory? If so, say this dialogue. If they've combined this with that item but haven't done this yet, then action this. It must be quite a... I mean, if you were to draw a diagram of it, it must be a pretty complex beast to deal with.
There is no diagram, certainly. I mean, what it was all in what we called script, which was our own language that we invented to handle this. And basically, at all key points where the player could initiate an interaction, there would be a script. Like if you click on something, or if you right-click on something, or if you drag an inventory object onto something, there'll be a script runs, and then that script basically is unique content, and it can do as many, if this has happened, if that's happened, then do this, then say that. And it was just millions of those, literally probably tens of thousands of them. And that's the guts of the game, So the game itself is in these script files; it's not in the engine as such. I mean, and they're all written that way, pretty much, using a slightly different system. But that's basically how you make an adventure game, unless you're crazy. They're kind of readable. I mean, the thing is, we were hiring people with no programming experience who had never made a game before, sitting them down, giving them a bit of a tutorial written on the back of an envelope, and like 2 days later, they were actually helping make the game. So it was not that bad, I mean, no one understood the whole thing, but because it was too huge and complex. But it was not in itself inherently difficult.
Yeah, I think that it's about breaking it down into lots of small parts, sort of like, and that's where you kind of like win, because if you can be logical about a very small part, like using the manhole cover the manhole key on the manhole cover, sort of like all you need to check for is does George, or rather, you can't do this unless George has it in his inventory. So all you're doing effectively then is, the inventory, I've chosen this thing to use on that object, and therefore I'll run this script, kind of. And where it becomes a little complex is if he then tries to use it on the open manhole, sort of, it's kind of like, oh, I can't do that because I've already done it, kind of thing. So you're checking, but it's one tiny thing. But it's how that tiny thing then links to other tiny things, like getting the manhole key from the workman, and you can't get the manhole key until you've got rid of the workman, and you can't get rid of the workman until you've got the newspaper. So it's all these kind of interconnected things, which if you take each one, it's a simple thing. It's how those little simple things link together to form something more complex, and that's really what's at the heart of a lot of these puzzles. It's just lots and lots of little things which don't have any complexity at all.
I think one of the defining features of a point-and-click adventure is when you do an action that's not meant to work, and then you see how much detail they put into a game. So for Broken Sword, if you try to put one object with another, often you'd get a silly response like, why would I do that combination? And some humorous line coming out of it. Now, another point-and-click game I love, it's amazing, and it's Discworld, but it's immensely complex. You have to look at walkthroughs if you really seriously want to complete that game. There's no way you could do it on your own by pure logic. Some of it is absolutely nuts. But if you play Discworld and you're the poor person listening to a person playing it, the phrase you'll hear a lot is, that doesn't work. And that was pretty much what he said. Every time you did a combination, the game didn't want you to. That doesn't work. And that was it. So for my poor mum, bless her, when I was playing Discworld when I was a teenager, she heard that statement a lot because, like I say, this game was not that logical at times. So you'd be trying every combination possible, and then you just randomly come across it was right out of just going through all the combinations. But yeah, that doesn't work.
We tried to catch a lot.
That was a design choice, wasn't it, with Broken Sword? Sort of making it logical. It doesn't mean that it was easy, but it would be logical. Well, apart from the goat puzzle.
How has this become so famous? Okay, I know you have to do a certain sequence of events to get past the goat. I get that. But what has made this one event within the whole game? And bearing in mind, this game is full of wonderful moments. The goat is what everybody talks about when it's Broken Sword. I'm sure that wasn't the intention when the goat puzzle was put in.
The problem was that it used a UI move that wasn't common to the rest of the game. So I mean, really, people were just were stuck because they had not been required to use the UI in that particular. It was a right click, wasn't it? I think where you wouldn't expect it. So that was the real problem, and pretty serious flaw in many ways, I guess.
Yeah, I think the obvious sort of thing there was that sort of George actually ran at that point, and he'd never run in the game. You didn't actually control him to make him run, obviously because you click, but sort of it's difficult to kind of get your head around the fact that he needs to run, but he never runs anywhere else in the game, and that I think flummoxed a lot of people. But yeah, it's just one of those, just one of those things. I think that you become blind. It's obvious to you because you're developing this puzzle, and so you become blind to how the players will actually view this when they come to it completely fresh. And this is why testing should really kind of catch things like this. Oh, well, it's not very clear that you're supposed to do that. But it never did in this instance.
So how do you feel about more modern? This has actually happened to Broken Sword on the iPad, where there's lots of hints. The hint system. How do you feel about that being added to point-and-click adventures? And is it a dumbing down, or is it literally to help those people who've maybe not got the patience like we did back in the day to try and advance further in the game?
I don't think it's inherently bad, really.
Okay, I remember this. I was beta testing Broken Sword. I had like an early version. It was the iOS Flight, whatever it is. And you told me I'd been using the hint system quite a lot because you've been logged.
That would be me.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, we actually did some. We put some logging into when we did the iOS versions of the games. We realised that because they were on the internet and could just do HTTP post things, you could very easily write logging that, and of course they banned it now. You're not allowed to do it in quite the same way. But what we did back then was, we were logging interactions and how many sessions people were playing and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it was anonymous. You didn't know who it was. You just know that someone had played the game 10 times, and you could average out the length of each of those sessions and how much percentage of the game they solved in those sessions and how far they got and how many screens they progressed through. I mean, it was gold really. Suddenly it was all something you were guessing was all exposed, and you could look at it and see how people were playing your game, and it was remarkable. And it also, in the case of the director's cut, it uncovered some horrible truths about where people were playing to, and then subsequently not playing, and the data was deemed to be untrue and censored, but it was true because you could. It wasn't lying, but it wasn't popular. Because basically, on the director's cut, people were getting stuck in those tunnels underneath the river, quite close to the beginning. There was quite a tricky puzzle, and we lost a lot of players on that, and we knew we were losing them because we had it written down, I mean, these days it's all Steam rewards, so you can see from that anyway. You know, you can look at a game and see where the rewards are coming through, and you know, you can look at anybody's game and get a pretty good picture of what the gameplay, you know, fall off is. I mean, my guess is most games, if you look at it, they're not played to completion, and they should be, really. And if they're not, then what's going wrong? You know, it's a bit of a failure of a game if you know it loses 2/3 of its buyers. You know, quite within the first 10% of the implemented game that people have paid for. So, I mean, to go back to your earlier question, if a few hints here and there get people through at their stuck point and playing and seeing the rest of the game, then that's probably not such a bad thing. Because people will put a game down. You know, when you're stuck, you played it a bit. You know, I'm playing an old Resident Evil game on the Xbox at the moment, and I died at a certain point, and I died again. I had it on easy. I died again. I thought, I'm a bit tired of this now. I'll have a break. Switch the console off, and now there's a huge psychological barrier in front of me to actually go back and try again. Now, will I actually do it? I might do, but I might not, because now I've got to boot the console up and choose that same game and try again on something I've failed 3 times on. I mean, there's a good chance I'll never go back to it, and it's probably 10% into the game. So, you know, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that particular game, it should say, oh yeah, this guy's just died 3 times in a row. We're just gonna let him go right through it. I mean, it really should. It should say he's died too many times. He should just walk through it now, and no matter what he does, this boss is not going to kill him, you know, because that'll get me. I'll go, oh, look at me, I'm a genius, you know, I've done it now. I'm feeling good. I'm gonna see what the story throws at me next, you know. I don't want to be stopped, you know.
Mm. No, I can understand that.
We are providing entertainment after all. You know, people want to feel challenged, but at the same time, you know, sort of, they don't want to feel as though it's an impossible challenge. I mean, I've done exactly the same as you, Tom. I've got to a point in a game where I just keep dying no matter what I try, and I've never gone back to that game. You know, sort of, and it's been a game that I've really enjoyed up to that point. You know, sort of, and it's a shame really, but I just know that I'll never get past it. You know, the new Psychonauts game is going to have a mode where you've got infinite life or something like this, just to enable you to get through it if you get stuck. And that, to me, is a great idea, because it means that you can enjoy it without constantly feeling frustrated. Because we're not all, you know, super ninja with our, you know, sort of like gamepad skills and things, are we? So we need to be able to kind of buy a game, which is still not cheap, early games, you know, sort of after all this time. And we want to feel as though we're going to get some value out of it.
Yeah,
I remember playing Horizon Zero Dawn on the PlayStation 4, which is an absolutely beautiful game, really fantastic story, beautiful graphics. This game has pretty much everything. It's the reason I got a PlayStation 4, because I'm usually all Xbox, but I was quite happy to get the console just for that one game. And I got stuck. And then I get past that bit after a lot of frustration, a lot of time, and then I got stuck again. And I was like, I haven't got the time for this. I really want to play this game. The story is riveting, but I can't keep getting stuck like this. Thankfully, then they added a story mode. This is just a very kind way of saying this is even easier than easy. You can just play it, enjoy the story, sit back, enjoy the spectacle around you. We won't give you clues or tips. It's story mode. It's a gentle, and it was for me, who didn't have the time to keep going stuck. It was just a bit of a salvation that I could see the end to this game, and I absolutely adored it. It was spectacular, and the lack of difficulty didn't spoil it for me.
Yeah. But the beauty also of something like Minecraft is that you know when it's going to happen. because you got the day-night cycle. In the day, it's butterflies and flowers and sheeps running around, barring, and everything's great. And you know when it gets dark, the vampires come out and the zombies come out, and as long as you can hide in your house, you're going to be safe. And I really love that. You got a choice, and you can go out there and fight them or whatever, and play it on killer mode or whatever. But if you just want to avoid all the trouble, you just go in your little house at night and you're safe. It's great.
Now we're going to have to start bringing this podcast to a close. We've been talking for 50 minutes, which is great. Really interesting stuff, guys. Thank you so much for joining me today. But Steve, just before we go, you've been busy with the old writing again, and you've not that long ago released another book. And of course, you're well known for game writing, and you've been very good to sort of do lots of talks in person before the fun of recent events in the last 15 months. I won't say the word, but I'm sure you know what I'm thinking, where it's been a bit difficult to go outside and mingle. Certainly no chance of a full house. Sorry, bingo reference. At the moment. However, you've been able to put pen to paper or finger to keyboard, however you do it these days, and you've written a book. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that, Steve.
Well, thanks for the plug. It's called an Introduction to Game Writing, and basically it's aimed at people 10 plus, but anybody who's never written a game or doesn't have a clue about game writing, no matter how skilled they are at writing or not, will benefit from it. But I wanted to aim it at younger people because there's nothing really sort of aimed at that age group. There's lots of great game writing books, in the sense that sort of you can improve your sort of like interactive narrative skills in all sorts of ways. But there's nothing really that kind of gets you on that path. And schools in lots of ways are trying their best to engage kids in new ways. In spite of, the restrictions of the curriculum and so on. So I just thought it would be great to do this. And particularly, sort of, I've done a number of workshops in schools, and, sort of like, no matter the ability of the kids involved, they always really get involved and love sort of trying to make these interactive stories. So, sort of like with lockdowns and restrictions, sort of I haven't been able to do any of that. So it was just an ideal time to write the book and, sort of like convert what I've learned and done in the workshops to create it. So it's, it goes through a very step-by-step process, and it starts from very basic ideas and just builds the complexity up, and everything's clear and lots of diagrams. And it's not a very long book, sort of it's 130 odd pages, I think. And, sort of I've tried to keep the price down to a reasonable level as well, because too many game writing books are very, very expensive. So it's $7.99 in English money, and equivalent prices in other parts of the world. So, sort of hopefully people get an awful lot out of it. And people have already saying good things about it, so I'm quite pleased with that.
Fantastic. Is there an audio book, Steve Ince-narrated version, or is that coming?
No, it wouldn't really work, because it relies so much on the diagrams and sort of like the sort of like the examples that I put. It would be difficult to do it as an audio book.
Fair enough.
Sort of. It's just one of them things, sort of, I've done, sort of like online workshops, but, I think the book actually goes into a lot more detail and is a lot clearer, and the beauty of that is the fact that, sort of, you have this, sort of as a physical book in your hand or the Kindle version, so you can read it on the Kindle, which is even cheaper. Sort of, and you can just take your own time. You can, sort of like work through this at your own pace. No pressure, to do it in any way. You can create your own stories in your own way. There's no, do it in this style or anything. There's no mad secrets or anything like that. Game writing isn't about mad secrets, in spite of what some people say.
So, what's the name of the book, Steve,
sorry.
and where can we buy it?
It's
Oh, he's even got it. Look at that. He's ready for such moments.
Game writing.
A workshop for interactive stories.
Yeah. So you can buy it from Amazon, or you can order it from your local bookshop or online booksellers. Sort of, and yes.
Thank you, Steve.
Steve's actually saying it's a short book, but
They look quite weighty.
Well, I mean, look at that. It's not short.
It is a short.
I'm struggling. I'm struggling with it, to be honest, Steve.
Yeah, well, sort of if you'd sort of done more schoolwork instead of learning to program the ZX81 or something.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, guys. Tony, we're going to talk about your project on the next one, because I think that deserves more than a 2-minute chat. I think we'll go into more detail, because I'm intrigued, and I'm sure other people will. So thank you, guys, and thank you, everyone, for watching, whether it's been live or watching the pre-recorded version on YouTube. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you again next time.